Okay, before we begin, just a little bit about my background. I have been with Microwise for the past 8 years, since before government incentive programs such as Meaningful Use and PQRS even launched. So for these past 8 years, a good portion of mine and my team's responsibilities have been to educate ourselves with regulatory programs and help providers achieve incentives, or at the very minimum, avoid penalties. So today we're going to talk specifically about the incentive that's of importance this year. It's MIPS 2019. We're going to take a brief look into the incentive overall so you can determine whether or not you're eligible and have a better idea on what you will need to do to avoid any Medicare penalties. During the second part of the webinar, we will be joined by Shardul Mehta from Presidio. Presidio is a qualified data registry and is going to give you another look into how you can meet your measures and then submit them at the end of the year if you are eligible and need to report. Okay, so a quick glance at our agenda for the day. We will touch upon the adjustments first, what happens if you choose to not participate, what happens if you do just a bare minimum, and also what happens if you do exceptionally well. We will review how to determine whether or not you even have to report, especially since there have been some changes since 2018. And then we will take a very quick glance at the scoring, just so that you have an idea of how Medicare would determine whether to allocate a positive incentive or apply a penalty to your practice. And lastly, we will discuss the different reporting options available, which will be followed by Presidio's display of their easy-to-read measure dashboard. So let's begin. First, we're going to talk about adjustments. The very important thing to notice here is that all of what we're going to talk about today applies to your Medicare Part B claims. So the reporting year here shown in the top row of columns and the payment year in the bottom row are always 2 years apart. So if we're looking at 2019 reporting year, we can see that if a provider chooses to not report, they can expect a 7% deduction from all of their Medicare Part B claims come 2021. On the other hand, if this provider does report, they can either submit the minimum requirement and get a neutral adjustment of 0, or if they pass the minimum and do exceptionally well, they can earn up to 7% positive incentive on, again, all of their Medicare Part B claims come 2021. The amount that you receive back will depend on how many other providers fail. So remember that this is a zero net sum incentive program, and CMS put in a certain amount of money before they started this, and they're not adding any more money into it. So if the provider next door fails, they take his penalty dollars and add it to the pool to be split amongst those who receive incentives. So the more people fail, the higher the incentives will be for those who pass. If anyone joining today did participate in 2017, you may have seen that the incentives you're receiving this year are relatively small, and that is because the requirements to avoid the penalty back in 2017 were only 3 points. So essentially everybody passed because it was so easy, and so everybody had to split the initial amount of money that CMS allocated because there were no penalty dollars. In 2019, this requirement jumps from 3 points to 30 points, so it's going to be a lot harder to pass, which means that there probably will be a lot more providers that do fail, and so for those who do well, that just means higher incentives. In addition to that, CMS has set aside an additional pool of money for providers with exceptional performance. And so in 2019, in order to be considered an exceptional performer and to qualify for this additional amount, a provider has to collect over 75 out of 100 possible points for their total MIPS score. That means that they would get an incentive that's higher than 7% if they do exceptionally well. Okay, so now that you know what happens if you do or don't participate, let's see how to determine whether or not you are required to submit. So there are 2 parts to eligibility. The first one is the type of the provider that you are. The left column lists all of the providers that have been eligible for the past 2 years since 2017, which is when MACRA started. But please also take note of the column on the right. So physical therapists, occupational therapists, registered dietitians, clinical psychologists, all of those people are also subject to MIPS regulatory, which is new as of this year. If you found your credentials on this previous slide, then the second part you're going to want to evaluate is whether or not your provider is a low volume threshold provider. So there are three categories here. The first one you want to look at is your Part B, allowed Part B charges. So if you are low volume, if you bill $90,000 or less. Next, count your Medicare Part B beneficiaries. If you don't exceed 200, you are low volume. And then lastly, you're going to want to look at the number of professional services rendered. And again, if you render less than 200, you are considered low volume. Now, the way that they determine this low volume threshold is that they look at claims data from specific timeframes in the years prior and current. If a provider does want to, they can opt in. So for example, if you're, you don't bill more than 90,000 in allowable charges, but you exceed 200 beneficiaries and 200 professional services rendered, you can still opt in. So you're not required because you don't exceed the low volume threshold for all three categories. But if you do exceed it for one or two, you can opt in and still report. So if your providers do all the work, they've been doing it for the past 2 years, CMS determined that they're not eligible this year, they can still opt in and report. If the provider does report, they will receive a final MIPS score and a final adjustment. So if you are going to opt in, you want to make sure that you're doing pretty well and you're definitely not going to get a penalty. Also, another thing to kind of consider is if a provider doesn't exceed the low volume threshold on his or her own, they can report as a group if there are 2 or more providers within the group. So if the 10 combined exceeds these low volume thresholds, then the providers within the 10 can report as a group. Okay, so during that previous slide, I had mentioned that CMS will use claims for specific timeframes to calculate those volume thresholds. So for 2019 eligibility, they will look at 2 12-month periods. The first one already passed. It was from October 2017 through September 30th of 2018. Those are the claims that they looked at, and the results of this review are already released. So you can use the link here below, plug in the provider's MPI in this link, and you will see whether or not, according to this first review, whether or not this provider is eligible and required to submit to MIPS. The second review will take place from October 1st of 2018 through September 30th of 2019. So they will look at the claims that fall within this time frame. And the results of that review will be released sometime late in the summer. So if a provider is determined as eligible for both periods, then they must report. But if they're only eligible for one period, they don't have to. So for example, if you're eligible now, but they determine during the second review that you're not eligible, then you don't have to report. If you're not eligible now, during the second review, they determine that you are, then you don't have to report. You must be eligible for both periods in order to have to report, in order to be required to report from ACRA. And again, you always do have an option to opt in if you really want to submit. Okay, so another point worth mentioning is that during this eligibility claim analysis, CMS may also assign a special status to the practice. The advantage is that those with a special status qualify for reduced reporting requirements in certain performance categories. So small practices, which are practices with 15 physicians or less, or hospital-based statuses are the most common ones. So when you check the eligibility at that link from the previous slide, this website will also indicate for you whether or not the provider or group are assigned such a status. And we're going to send out the slides, so you will have that link in your emails. Okay, so now that we've determined whether the provider is eligible or not, we've discussed the consequences of not reporting and the benefits of reporting. Let's also take a look at what type of information the providers are required to submit if they are determined as eligible and needing to report. So MIPS has 4 categories. The first one is quality, then you have promoting interoperability, improvement activities, and cost. To avoid the penalty, the provider must collect a minimum of 30 points across some or all of these categories. So that's for 2019. Come 2020, that threshold is going to change, and it just keeps on increasing. So again, In 2017, it was 3 points. In 2018, it was 15 points. Come 2019, which is this year, you must collect 30 points. So it just keeps growing. It becomes harder and harder for you to meet these requirements. So let's start with quality. There are 257 measures available for reporting in the quality category, and measure achievement points are determined by comparing providers' performance on a measure to an established measure benchmark. So if the provider is to report a measure, they must have at least 20 qualifying cases. For example, if they want to report on hemoglobin A1C for diabetic patients, they must have at least 20 patients that are diabetic, and then their score will be compared to an established benchmark. Measures can be reported with an EHR, so long as the EHR is certified under the 2015 certification guidelines. So, if you have a certified EHR that's 2014, you're going to want to make sure to upgrade it to 2015. They can also report via claims or via the registry. Now, claims can get a little bit messy, just kind of a forewarning, because they're subject to human error. Essentially, with claims reporting, the biller is the one who is responsible for having to remember to add specific CPT codes to the eligible claims. And the challenge is that not every claim is eligible. Each measure has multiple CPT codes, so it can get pretty tangled up in there. If you don't have an EHR and you'd rather avoid claims reporting, you can use a registry, which is why we have Presidio today. They will explain to you a little bit further how they can, connect and extract data out of your billing software to help you report on these measures. Now, you do also have an ability to earn some bonus points in this category, and bonus points are available depending on kind of measures you pick. They're also available for small practices. So again, 15 physicians or less will automatically get bonus points in the quality category. And also, if your overall quality score improves from the previous years, if you reported during previous years, then you'll get the bonus point. Okay. The next category is promoting interoperability. Participants must collect data for certain measures for continuous 90 days or more, and then submit. There are hardship exceptions that are available to those small practices. So again, practices of 15 physicians or less, or to those who are using a decertified EHR product. So if you don't think you can meet promoting interoperability, you can claim a hardship exemption, and the 25% weight of the score will be moved over to quality. So if you do claim an exemption from PI, they're just going to weigh in harder on your quality portion. Okay, the remaining two categories are improvement activities and cost. In improvement activities, points are doubled for small practices, and those of you who are a patient-centered medical home site can get full credit for the section automatically. So there are 118 activities to select from. Most of these are yes or no kind of attestations, but you do have to have a process in place where if CMS decides to audit you at some point down the line, you must be able to show that you did in fact follow through with these activities. Lastly, cost is the only category that is calculated by CMS and does not actually require reporting. So CMS will review the claims, and they're looking at specific measures and then calculate the cost for those measures. So this they will determine automatically. You don't actually have to do anything to report. They'll pull it based on the claims that you submit to them. So with that, I did want to leave enough room for Shardul to give you kind of a preview of the Presidio Dashboard and overview. So I'm going to hand over the presentation to him. And again, if you have any questions about what I reviewed, again, this was just a very broad overview to give you a very basic idea, but feel free to either reach out to us or type your questions in the chat, and we'll follow up with all of our contact information at the end when we send out the slides. Okay, so Shardul, I'm making you the presenter, and go ahead, take over.
All right. So Vida, thank you. So like Vida said, my name is Shardul Mehta. I'm a product manager here at Presidio. I've been with Presidio for over 5 years now. And before we dive into our portal and our dashboard, I just wanted to take a couple minutes to go over who Presidio is and what we do. So we are a healthcare analytics company that's been in the analytics space for 15 years now. We serve over 250 hospitals, and we have over 4,500 active physician users who are using our system. Over the last decade and a half, we have touched over 20 million patients. We've processed well over 60 million encounters, and our entire platform is cloud-based. So there's no need for any on-site hardware installations or anything like that. Everything is accessible from a secure internet connection. Now, our product range, we have a wide product range that covers utilization and cost analytics, care management, care coordination between hospitals, providers, and post-acute care facilities, quality management, as well as patient engagement portals and telemedicine as well. The way we're able to provide all these services to our clients is through our proven platform architecture. Now, over the last decade and a half, we have a deep expertise in getting data. Now, we can get data from various different sources, whether it's from claims data or your clinical data. If we have access to a database of data, we have a team of experienced extractors who can go in and get all the data that we need for, in this case, for all of the MIPS measures that we would be reporting on your behalf. Now, we would get that data, we would run it through our integration services, our artificial intelligence to get your measure performance. And then we would use all of that information and generate a dashboard for you. Now, as part of our services, like Vida mentioned, we are certified by CMS as a qualified data registry. So we can report MIPS measures for you. So as part of our services, we can integrate, process all of your raw data, generate a MIPS dashboard for you, and submit all of your MIPS performance data directly to CMS. Now, this includes your quality performance data, your CPIA activities, as well as your promoting interoperability measures as well. Now, our portal also allows for providers to monitor their MIPS performance throughout the year. Now, as we get your data, we would continuously calculate your measure performance, update the dashboard, and this means that there's no need to wait for claims data to be processed, finalized, or deal with any of the human error that Vida mentioned. Now, all this comes together in our portal and our dashboards. Now, what we see here is our MIPS dashboard. Now, what this dashboard does is this is the dashboard that you would have access to that would be continuously updated throughout the year as we get your data. Now, what we're looking at is an enterprise level view. We can see that this particular enterprise has one practice with 3 providers. We have some metrics on how many total patients are involved here and how many QPP measure sets we're pulling data from. Below that, we have your MIPS final score bar. Now, this bar will continuously change as we get your data and as we process it. So in the beginning, you may start out over here on the right-hand side, the bar would be red. Once you cross that minimum threshold, the bar will, throughout the year, it will change from red to yellow, letting you know that you are now past the point of worrying about any sort of negative adjustment. Now, ideally, we want to get you as far to the right as possible, past the exceptional performance bonus. So once you cross the exceptional performance bonus threshold, the bar will turn green, letting you know that you're in the clear and you are looking at not only a positive adjustment, but a bonus. Now, we can see here that this particular organization is right here in the middle. They haven't quite reached their exceptional performance bonus yet. So there's a couple more graphs below that can help us identify how we can increase their performance. Below the bar, below the final score bar, we have our care gaps tree map. This care gaps tree map gives us a view into our quality measure performance. Now, each of these bars, each of these squares and rectangles represents a specific measure that we are monitoring for our clients. Now, our clients can subscribe to multiple measures, not just the minimum required measures. We generally recommend clients to monitor and subscribe to anywhere from 10 to 12 measures, and we can monitor these measures and then submit the highest scoring measures when it comes time for reporting. The size of these boxes, they represent how many patients are not meeting the numerator. So these larger boxes over here on the left-hand side represent measures that need attention. These boxes here in the bottom right corner that are smaller, these are measures that are generally performing a little bit better, and they may not need attention right away. Below that, we have a view of our MIPS composite performance score across our organization, so you can compare how individual practices are doing compared to the overall practice. And an administrator can reach out to the individual practices if they see that they're falling behind, and if there's anything that needs to be updated. Next to that, we have our clinical practice improvement activities graph, and here we can actually allow you to attest to the clinical practice improvement activities that you would be reporting on. Now, our system will take into account exactly how many activities you would like to report on for each of your providers, as well as any potential certified EHR technology bonuses that are applicable for a given activity. And below that, we have a view of our promoting interoperability measures and the performance on each of those. Now, coming back up to our care gaps tree map, generally speaking, the best way to improve your score is to make sure that we're doing as well as we can on our quality measures. Now here, if we wanted to, let's say, focus in on a specific quality measure like fall screening, we can select the measure, we can select multiple measures if we wanted to, and we could drill down into our quality portal. Now, once we come to our quality portal, we do have access to a few filters here on the left-hand side, so we can look at the quality performance of our entire organization at an enterprise level. If we wanted to drill down to quality performance for individual practice within our organization, or if we wanted to drill down to individual provider level performance, we could do that as well. Now, within this dashboard, we would see all of the measures that our organization has subscribed to, along with the measure names here on the left-hand side, a count of all of the eligible patients here in the next column, and then we have the performance column. Now, this performance column is color-coded, so green represents patients who are meeting a particular numerator, red represents patients who are not meeting a particular numerator, orange represents patients who are falling into a denominator exclusion, and then we also have yellow that represents patients who may be falling into a denominator exception. And then over here on the right, on the far right, we have a performance rate column. Now here we see the first number where it shows our current performance, and in parentheses we have the threshold that's been set by CMS. So the minimum threshold that needs to be met to start accruing the maximum number of points. So you can see down below here that as we cross the 72% threshold, the bar went from red to green. So obviously we want to try to make as many of these bars green as possible. Now there's a couple of ways we can identify patients that may need to have a little bit of work done to meet these measures. So the quickest way is, let's say if we are again focusing on the fall screening measure, we can come over here to the red segment for patients who are not meeting the numerator. If we click on that segment, the system will pull up all of those patients who are not meeting that numerator and show you here in a list below. Now, as part of this list, we also can show you the overall population of patients and all your patients who are part of the denominator population, as well as patients who are meeting the numerator and who are not meeting the numerator. Now, we can take a look at multiple measures if needed. So if we wanted to, we can jump into HbA1c or any of the other measures that are available. Now, we also give you access to specific descriptions for each of these measures. So if anyone needs any extra details on the given criteria for a measure, that's available here as well. Now, once we've identified the patients who are not meeting a particular numerator, there's a couple different things that we can do. It's possible for us to take these patients and export a file that will take us directly into that will export a file for us that we can use to reach out to these patients and provide, and the practice can actually pull them into the office to bring them into the office to close out these gaps, or we can actually bring them over to our care management portal, and in the care management portal they can be assigned to care managers, and the care managers can reach out to them as well. As part of the scope of today's talk, we won't be going into the care management portal, but this is in a nutshell the MIPS portal offerings that we have here at Presidio.